$20. Okay, so there. And it's a pretty cool bag. I also have blankets, I have hats, I have mugs, all sorts of goodies at the back of the auditorium here. And if you have any questions or you want to see something, then let me know, because I'm in the back. And also we have membership forms on the right-hand side. And if you're a member, we have name tags for you too.
Sure.
So if you like them, tell Andy that they're good stuff. If you don't like them, don't say anything. Go ahead. Thank you very much.
Hey, good catch. Okay, you want to get a name tag so we know you. This is the way I find out. Who has never been here before? Raise your hand. Newcomers. Aha. Who's been here before but not a member? Raise your hand. One lady in the back. Now the members who voted us all back in. All right. Is your husband here? Oh, I see your husband. It's time for the outreach report. Moving things right along. Mr. Chuck McPartland happens to be the most outlandishly outrageous and outreachable outreach guy you've ever seen in your life. The man knows his stuff. And what are we doing now?
Don't ask questions.
I'm just going to get things out of the way.
Okay, thanks, Ron. Quiet month for outreach. Again, it's mainly our normal monthly activities. So we've moved Telescope Tuesday to the second Tuesday of the month. So that'll be on the 9th at Community Rail Marketplace starting at 7. And it'll be on the second Tuesday of every month for the rest of this year. We try to maximize first quarter moons since there's so much light over there. And then second Saturday on the 13th is a star party here. It's free and weather permitting. We have all kinds of goodies to show. And then we have a couple of school events. We have Mountain View School on Tuesday the 16th. And they are actually offering volunteers who come with telescopes a potluck dinner at 4 o'clock. And they have traditionally had very good food there. So that's one to think about. That's from set up at 4 p.m. and then it runs till about 7 p.m. And then on the 18th, Thursday the 18th, we have Nuts, which is Night Under the Stars at San Ynez Elementary School, and that runs from 5 to 7. And then third Friday is our normal Westmont Public Telescope night, starting at 7 o'clock. So those are the outreaches. As far as last year, 2023, we sort of made a comeback from COVID. I think there was a lot of pent-up demand, and people who discovered astronomy during COVID showed up. So we had 182 events, which is less than our usual for a year pre-COVID, but quite a comeback. But we had more attendance relative to the number of events. We ended up with 16,142 people coming to our events last year. And yeah. And if you're a member and you've been vetted by the museum with the background check, and you help out at 6 events a year, you get your membership comped, and we have 25 members who managed to achieve that this year. And you get a little pin from the Night Sky Network. They haven't arrived from the Night Sky Network yet, but sometime this year we'll get our 2023 pins. And we had a total of 2,403 volunteer hours. So we did pretty good, even with fewer events. Most of the events we lost were like school events up in San Ynez Valley. I guess schools are being a little slower to ramp back up. There's propaganda over there on the little entryway kiosk there, star maps, moon maps, webpage listings, bookmarks. So feel free to graze on that stuff. And there's a Royal Astronomical Society of Canada Observer's Handbook for 2023. That means it's no good, you know, the calendar part is no good for this year, but it's got a wealth of other astronomy information in it, and I can't stand to shred it. So if anybody wants it, please pick it up. If not, it'll get shredded. But anyway, thank you. Thanks, Ron.
This night should be called Nuts. It reminds me of October. This is a true story. We were in this very room for the legendary astronomy magazine columnist Bob Berman, who was sitting in his home back in upstate New York. And I'd set him up, and he liked my style online, and he said he'd do it, even though he charges far, far more than what we offer with our honorarium. And as I was introducing him right here, damn, my phone is gonna be that kind of a day. Yeah, as I was introducing him, somebody told me nobody sent him the email link. And his secretary had put the following week as the date, so he wasn't even waiting. And so we ended up watching an incredible video of his very speech that he gave to a bunch of scientists that year. And it was the same program he would have given us. He will be back with us in March. In 2 months, Berman will be on the screen, Bob Berman. Next month, let me tell you who I've got planned. Gentlemen, to talk about the history and contributions of Mount Wilson Observatory. Tim Thompson is going to talk online. He may be here live, I don't know, or we'll get this stuff figured out here on the Zoom, and he'll do it online. So we'll see how that happens. That's February 2nd, a little less than a month away. I wanted to introduce you to our events manager because I got to remember Diane West. I thought I had it down. Welsenbach. I keep telling myself Wensham. No, it's not CH, it's Welsenbach. Okay. What we're going to get you is some events to plan for us because it's an appointed position. And in the old days, pre-COVID, we had a June potluck here on the campus of the museum. It would be at that house back there, or once we had it right here on the edge of the river, the bridge across the creek. Everybody brings a potluck. That would be our June meeting. Instead of coming in here, we used to have a Christmas party in December, and you're going to be doing that. And then we got all kinds of other great things. Now let's get to our guest. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. Hope you join. 100 years ago, astronomy took some major turns. Old Edward Hubble, is it Edwin or Edward Hubble? He looked through the Mount Wilson telescope. We'll hear a lot about him next month. Quantum stuff was coming out in Europe. Einstein was just heating up in Springfield, Vermont. A guy named Russel Porter fired up an awesome club we're going to hear about tonight, designed to make telescopes and check out the heavens, grinding away at quality lenses, like our guys attempt to do on Tuesday night online, providing the cutting edge technology to the rest of us. That was 100 years ago. I first learned of Stellafane Astronomy Society back in September from one of Jerry Wilson's weekly talking points for our Monday morning vlog, which I forgot to tell you about. That's 11 a.m. YouTube, SBAU Astro Hour, and watch us and join us. And in 1923, the Roaring 20s, Stellafane's centennial is just ending, I guess, but they're still partying back there on the East Coast. We've got the main spokesman for one of America's premier telescope clubs ready to talk to us. Hope we can hear him well. Dr. Mario Motta is a medical doc with a real interest in cosmology and a BS in physics and biology from Boston College. He graduated from Tufts Medical School and became one of their associate professors of medicine there. Practiced medicine in Salem, Massachusetts from 1983 till retiring last year. 2 years ago, 2022. Want to learn more? Just Google our guest speaker. I'll let him tell us more. Dr. Mario E. Motta.
Well, thank you for inviting me to speak to you. I have a PowerPoint. I assume I can share my screen.
Yeah, go ahead. We'll allow that.
Okay.
I'm going to let you take over, Tom. I'm done.
No. No, I started speaking.
And
That's good. You're looking good.
all right. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. So what you're looking at is my homemade 32-inch telescope. It took me 5 years to build that. Not my first, but my latest. And I've been using that for the last 15 years. I enjoy making telescopes and then using them. I was originally going to go into astrophysics and ended up in medicine. That's a whole nother hour lecture, which I won't go into. But I wouldn't have even thought to make a telescope. My first telescope I made when I was started when I was age 12, finished it by age 14, and with that won a couple of science awards, and I think it helped me get into college and then medical school. I know I was asked about it when I was applying to medical school. So why would I build a telescope? And rather than just buy one, my parents were going to get me a small scope. And I made a deal with them saying, just give me the same amount of money and I'll grind my own mirror. There was a lot of skepticism, especially for a brash 12-year-old, but they finally relented. And I had instead of a 60 millimeter Japanese small refractor, I made with the same amount of money, a 8-inch f7, which I used for many years. I still have that mirror. And it came out much better than I think people can buy. And so why would I have done that? That's the whole history of Stellafane. Stellafane was founded by Russel Porter, who had excuse the pun, a stellar history. He started off as an engineering student, ended up at MIT. I'll go through that. Ended up going through 13 Arctic expeditions after he heard a lecture by Admiral Perry while he was at MIT. Then settled down in Port Clyde, Maine, to do some architecture work and set up an artist colony. Got called back to Vermont to help out at James and Lamson by the owner of that company. And then finally, later in his life, because his fame had spread, got called over to Caltech to help build the 200-inch Hale telescope. So let's go through that. So my inspiration is Russel Porter, because he taught us all how to make telescopes. And that's how I ended up with my telescope here, rather than buying one. So the reason it says 1924 in this picture is when that picture was taken is because the clubhouse for Stellafane was started in 1923 in September, but finished in January of 24. So this is actually 1 year from the completion of what we call the pink, because of the color paint that was eventually chosen. I'll get into that in a moment. So who's Russel Porter? He was a Renaissance man who did a number of amazing things in his life. Here he is as a schoolboy in Vermont, born in 1871. Later on, went to college. Here is a later picture of him. And here's his family, the Russel Porter family. Notice back then they dressed pretty well, don't you think? And it's interesting that no matter what activity they were doing, digging ditches, building buildings, grinding telescope mirrors, they all dressed pretty well. They kind of looked down at us in our later years here. So he started off at Norwich, transitioned to University of Vermont engineering. His father ran out of money in 91, had a rough period. So he had to drop out of Vermont. So Russell ended up going to Boston in 91, and in 92 managed to get into MIT, an architectural degree. So he had an engineering background, an architectural degree, and I think you'll see from some of his paintings and activities that all stood him quite well in later life. So while at MIT, he met Admiral Robert Perry, and he gave a lecture at MIT about expeditions to the Arctic. That fired his interest. He signed up for a number of expeditions. You can probably see my pointer, right? So he started off going to Greenland expeditions, several of them, 1894, 96, 1900, 97, were all in Greenland and northern eastern Quebec. Later years, he went to an expedition up to north of Scandinavia. And in fact, one of those, unfortunately, the ship got caught in ice and they had to winter over on the ice for a year, but they managed to survive that. His last expedition went to 1906. He went up and was a surveyor for Denali, and many of the charts on Denali were from Russel Porter. So what was his job on ship? He did the navigation, and with that, he used a telescope and transits. And he also was a recorder of the sites that they saw, and that'll show up in a moment. But by his using the small telescopes on ship, he became very interested in the sky. And when he finished his expedition, started teaching himself how to make a mirror. Here's on ship Diana in 1900 at Greenland. These are either photographs by him or paintings by him. This is up in Greenland. Many of his, this is Russel Porter here, many of his paintings and images are at the Arctica in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. If you go to the Native American building there, you'll see a lot of, it's an unmistakable style. If you see these pictures there, you'll know it's by Russel Porter. They'll be attributed, of course. So Greenland, 1900, with Eskimos. Here he is on the right, he has a beard at that point, younger man. And he did paintings of what he saw, which he was quite an accomplished artist. Here he is again with an Eskimo building an igloo, an Eskimo up in Greenland, and the Tromsø 1905, and the SS Hope, which was caught in ice and crushed and had a winter over. So he finally went to his last expedition to 1906 to Denali, did a number of paintings and did scientific survey work, which is what he was actually there for. He then took a trip to Jungfrau, Switzerland, had a number of paintings from there. Finally, he settled down. 1913, he settled down to Port Clyde around 1910, which is on the coast of Maine. And his thought was he would set up a artistic colony, which was all the rage back then in the early 1900s. So he designed a number of cottages. This was his actual home that he built at Port Clyde. While there, he wanted to do some astronomical work. So he managed to get two 16-inch blanks. Now, in 1913, that's enormous. I mean, nowadays, people get 8, 10, maybe 12 inches considered good size. But in 1913, the 16-inch was the moon. He managed to get two blanks from the John Brashear directly, courtesy of Hartness, a friend of his who ran the Jones and Lambert Company and eventually became governor of Vermont. And with that, he built a poloscope. Here's a diagram of it. He would sit in, you guys are in California, but New England winters are a little bit harsher than what you're exposed to. So there's a reason why you'd want to sit in a nice warm place and observe. So he had a telescope which was outside, but brought the image inside the building, and he would sit in comfort and observe with that 16-inch scope. Here's a modern, that building is still there. And here's an image taken just a few years ago of the exact same house. Painting by Russel Porter of the porch on his house. And some other cottages which he designed and either sold or rented out. This was known as the castle, and that was used by visiting dignitaries to Port Clyde. He designed the Belfast Church. So just to give you an idea of his talents. He also made a number of knickknacks and cast them. So this is a knickknack that he cast. It's a amateur astronomer looking through a Foucault tester at a mirror being made. And over here is a pitch lamp, which you polish the glass on pitch, and a number of utensils that are used in the process. So Russel W. Porter, this was 1940, actually, this is one of his later ones. Here is a small dish he made of someone looking through a telescope. And I don't know if anyone there has made a telescope and ground a lens, but this is the profile looking through a fluid cold tester. And he implanted that in a lot of items he made. He made a number of sundials, sun clock. Notice the analemma here to make the correction on the clock. Analemma in the sundial here again to make the time correction. So he was having a good time in Maine. James Hartness was president and CEO of Jones and Lambert. Now, back in the 1910s and 1920s, Vermont was the center of high-tech machinery. Why is that? Because they had water power. Okay, so just coming out of the early 19th century, we don't have lots of electricity and generation. Electricity is a relatively new phenomenon. So manufacturing plants tended to be situated where there was water power. In Vermont and New Hampshire and Maine have lots of water power, which is why these plants were built there at that time. So Springfield, Vermont was kind of like Silicon Valley is to us now back in 1910 and 1920. That's where the action was, and that's where machinery was made. So Jones and Lambert specialized in making very accurate gears and machinery for industry. And that's was all there in Springfield. Because of that, it had very high talented, high tech people who lived there. James Hartness needed a special instrument made called a comparator, so he could measure precisely the equipment he was making. And he knew that the man he needed was Porter, because he had the right talents to make this become a reality. So Hartness, basically, they were all friends, and he enticed him to come back to Springfield. And this is what they made. It, in fact, got a patent eventually in 1929, even though he finished it earlier than that. But basically, it was a device to measure machinery that they're making very precisely. Now, James Hartness, back in 1910, he was a wealthy man. He didn't make his lens, he sent away for the lens. Prior to Stellafane being born, if you wanted a telescope, you had to buy one. No one knew how to make telescopes back then. So if you wanted a telescope, you'd either send away to England or go to the two main manufacturers in the US, which was Alvin Clark in Massachusetts, or the Brashear Company in Pennsylvania. And they were expensive. To get even a this is a 6-inch refractor, to get a 6-inch telescope would cost the average person 2 or 3 years' salary. Needless to say, that was unaffordable. The only people who could afford telescopes prior to Russel Porter was independently wealthy people. So if you were a Lovell and you Lowell and you had a whole family and factory behind you and own the town of Lowell, Massachusetts, you could buy now 24-inch Alvin Clark, bring it to Arizona, and set up your own institute and observatory. Needless to say, average person couldn't do that. So the reason Russel Porter is important is he democratized astronomy for the masses. So although James Hartness was a very wealthy man, could afford to send away for a lens like this, most people can't do that. So what happened is the rest of the story here. He enticed him to come back to Springfield. Here's the place that Russel Porter lived in 1919. Here's Russel Porter, his wife Alice, and his daughter. And Russel Porter immediately started doing astronomy there, in addition to working for Harkness. Here he is on his porch, setting up a solar telescope so he can observe the sun on a regular basis. He then had the bright idea, why don't I teach other people who are interested how to make telescopes? So he asked anyone in town and people at James Lamson who would like to learn how to make mirrors. These are the original people who signed up. Every one of them worked at James and Lamson, so they were either machinists or engineers. Gladys Piper was a school teacher. She was the only one that was not part of James and Lamson, and they all set about making these telescopes. Here's the sizes that they worked on. The largest was 10-inch, the smallest was 3. They all finished them, and they were marvelous, and they didn't spend a fortune. Here's the original group in front of the James and Lamson group, and Russel Porter is holding a small mirror in his hand, proud of his students. This is how they dress, by the way. It's very interesting. They went as machinists in full three-piece suits. Here is Russel Porter demonstrating how to polish a mirror. Here's the pitch on top of glass and a glass mirror on top. And he's demonstrating the mirror that's being polished. He had quite a sense of humor and wrote, this is to the tune of HMS Pinafore, I'm told, but it's a separate song regarding telescope making. So they built these telescopes. What are you going to do with them? You start having star parties. They initiated star parties. Here's one in an observing field in 1920. 1920, they would basically set up tents, stay there all night, and observe with their newly made telescopes. Here's a 8-inch. This would be, back in 1920, enormous. This would be like my 32-inch compared to what most people get back then. Most people had 2- and 3-inch refractors back at that time. So that was the second revolution. You can actually make substantial sized telescopes and see the universe quite well, handmade, not spend a fortune, and do this as a general working man. So they'd go up to mountaintops in Vermont, Mount Ephraim in the 1920s. They'd get set up tents, bring their telescopes with them. 1920, you know, most places worry about mosquitoes. You have to worry about cows in Vermont. Notice there are no trees. Back in the early part of the 20th century, a lot of trees in New England were cut down for wood, fuel, building, and there were not many trees left in New England. There's no environmental movement back then. Since then, of course, they've all grown back, and Vermont is green again with quite a number of forests. But that's why they went to these open, they could have these open fields. There were no trees. Just a little bit of historical trivia. They went to various different sites, testing out, observing, had dinners set up. On Ephraim 1921, again, bring telescopes, observe all night. Frank Whitney, one of the original founders of Stellafane, Mount Ephraim in 22. Hawks Mountain in 21. And Porter was still being asked to do surveying work. He had quite a bit of experience with that. So he was asked to put a geology tablet on top of Mount Hawks. And here it is. And basically says it was occupied, surveyed the United States, longitude and latitude precisely measured. And he'd always add what a telescope mirror looks like. That was his kind of his trademark, what it would look like through a Foucault tester. For those of you that make telescopes, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Oscar Fulham in 21. Looks like an 8-inch telescope that he built. Hawks Mountain in 21. Again, more observing. So what happened is in 1922, they had all these telescopes made. They had a grand time observing with them. They didn't spend a lot of money putting them together. And they decided to enter into the Vermont State Fair. That made a huge splash. Everyone was amazed that these are the biggest telescopes they've ever seen. They were handmade by locals and they were precise and beautiful. They worked very well. Because of that, townspeople thought, why don't we set up a club in order to further this activity? So, by the way, I throw in some of he's done many of these cartoons. He had quite a sense of humor. So just to read this, let's see if we can get this damn thing together. It's a telescope that was built. Got to hurry, you want to catch that moon, sets it up for, and hell, what an image. And it's awful what it looked like. So he takes an axe to it. He was a perfectionist, and poor telescopes were not his thing. They had to be well made. And that's what Stellafane is all about. Excuse me. Stellafane, to this day, doesn't allow commercial entries. You don't have to make a telescope to attend Stellafane, but if you want to enter a telescope into the competition, it has to be handmade. You make it, either the mirror or the mechanics. We have prizes for optics, for mechanics, and for innovation. So special innovations. And many of these ended up being commercial products later on. Al Nagler, who makes some of the finest eyepieces, started off as an amateur at Stellafane. Celestron, the first catadioptric, was an entry at Stellafane in the 1960s and eventually became a company. I can name a whole list of them, but many people would come up with an innovative design, enter at Stellafane through the years, win a prize, and end up making a company out of that. And those are famous optical companies now. So here he is at the Stellafane, what became the Stellafane site. This is Russel Porter here. This is Whitfield, I believe. And what Russel Porter's father had some land at the top of a breezy hill, and he thought that'd be a good place to do. Notice there are no trees for an observing site. And looking north, you could see Mount Ascutney in Vermont, and that's another painting by Porter. What was there originally, just below the surface of Breezy Hill, was called a shack. And that was something that his father owned and he inherited. And they would come up there and observe, and it was a fairly good observing site. So here are members of either family or friends up there on top of Breezy Hill by the shack. And there's Russel Porter with his wife sitting on a rock near that, just off the upper surface there. They decided this would be a good place to set up a permanent site for observing. Russel Porter eventually donated the land to Stellafane, and that became the birth of Stellafane. I emphasize again, prior to this, if you wanted a telescope, you spent a fortune and had to be independently wealthy. Telescopes were not for the average man. And that's the key here as to why Russel Porter is somewhat considered a demigod up in New England. He basically started amateur astronomy in the United States. Up until that point, it was the domain of only large manufacturers and independently wealthy people who could afford them. So they decided this is where they were going to set up the Stellafane site, got a tractor and started clearing the land. And 1923, they started construction in the fall. Here it is being built. December 7th, 1923, it was officially incorporated in Vermont as Stellafane, Springfield Telescope Makers. So because of that, we this past summer celebrated 100th year of Stellafane, and it was very well attended. Started off with just a handful of people in 1923 and gradually grew through the years, except for World War II, when there was a 5-year hiatus. And then again in COVID in 2020 and 21, when there was another hiatus. It's been continuous ever since. And so this year was the 100th year of the founding and the first meeting. Stellafane itself, where others were invited, was 1926, but we still view 1923 as the official start. Here is being worked on. And 1924, pretty much completed, and you can see a set of telescopes out in front of the building. Here it is being constructed. That's out of place, I guess I should. And again, he was an artist, so he would make drawings of pretty much anything that was important to him. So here is December 7th, 1923. Telescope Makers of Spring. That was the incorporation date of the Springfield Telescope Makers. Porter, of course, was the first president and was the leading light for a number of years. 1923-24. Again, here is Porter and Alice here, and got someone up on the roof fixing something. Inside of the pink, I should say why it's called the pink. Let me go back one moment. It was painted, they needed some paint, and they went to local paint store in Springfield, asked for donations, and the proprietor didn't have enough of any one color to donate to them. He said, I have several cans that you can mix them together if you want. And they thought it was a good idea. It came out hot pink. At first it was considered a little strange, but they decided to go with it. And ever since, it's now become traditional. In fact, Stellafane is a National Historic Landmark now, so we're not going to change a thing. And it's that's the traditional color of Stellafane. But the reason we use pink paint was because that was what was donated when you mixed all the leftover paints together. And now we keep it that color. So inside the pink, we have a meeting room with stores telescopes back then. People would sit by the fireplace and either cook food or just to stay warm. If you observed all night, trap door came down and had stairs. Go upstairs, and in a comfy cot, you could spend the rest of the night sleeping and until you want to leave the next day. Much more comfortable than camping up on top of one of the mountains like they were used to doing. And here is in a more several years later when they did some finishing touches, including placing the caption on the sill here. It's called "The Heavens Declare the sorry, the heavens declare the glory of God," and that is the catchphrase on the roof there. Here it is in the early 1920s, some of the early founders and a few guests. And Porter was very fond of mentoring, not just teaching people how to make telescopes, but mentoring them. He loved having teenagers and young people up there, and he would teach them how to both observe and build telescopes. Here's some of the founders in later years. This is from the 1930s, as they're getting on in years, but they were the original founders. So it was a group effort to maintain it. Notice even though they're working with shovels, they have three-piece suits on. They the 1910s and 1920s people were very well dressed. They kind of look down at the way we're dressing tonight. So again, he had a sense of humor. He did a number of cartoons. I already showed you a few. Here's another one. I interspersed them. We have a collection of about 100 of these. But here he is, someone's looking at a comet through a homemade telescope, and they're arguing over what the comet is. They get into a little bit of a fight, knock over the telescope, and just settle their ways by just sitting on the broken telescope and observing naked eye. I wish we could settle things like that these days. So here's what happened, though. Albert Ingalls was editor at Scientific American in New York City. And he heard about this phenomenon that's happening up in Vermont of people building telescopes. Don't forget, up until this point, Ingalls had a small, I think 2 or 3 inch refractor. It cost a fortune. Anyone still wanted a telescope, the rest of the country, again, you had to be independently wealthy or have it donated by someone who was wealthy. So he was intrigued by the fact that some yokels up in Vermont were building telescopes that were much bigger than anyone else could buy, let alone obtain. So in 1925, yeah, this is a sketch by Porter, by the way, Ingalls decided to take a trip up to Stellafane. And he met Porter and asked about how people are making telescopes. This is the Springfield mount, which is another type of mount that Porter invented. So the eyepiece is up here, but it swings around in a very tight circle. The mirror is what swings around, and you don't have to climb a ladder. So Ingalls was amazed at all these people making telescopes that were quite phenomenally good. That led to November of 1925, an article in Scientific American, this is the cover, showing inside the pink an image projected of the sun. They had set up a solar telescope. And here's the article inside, Monthly Journal of Practical Information, Scientific American, The Heavens Declare the Glory of God, that's on the pink, and how a group of enthusiasts learned to make telescopes and become amateur astronomers by Albert Ingalls. This went off like a bomb worldwide. People read this and were amazed that with the concept, you could actually build your own telescope and didn't have to spend a fortune in Germany, England, or Alvin Clark and make your own telescopes that were really quite usable. So it spread like wildfire. Shortly after this was published, a number of astronomy clubs started springing up all across the United States. The Amateur Telescope Makers of Boston that I belong to and helped me build my telescopes started shortly thereafter. And a number of astronomy clubs across the country began with the inspiration of this article, which was inspired by Russel Porter and the founding of Stellafane. In fact, the fame spread so far, there were endless requests for kits to build, to grind their own mirrors. So what ended up happening is Stellafane set up making kits that they would sell at nominal cost to people who wanted them, and they sell them across the country, but as far away as India, Tasmania, South Africa, it went worldwide. The fame, Stellafane immediately, for anyone who was interested in astronomy, became a household name. So Ingalls and Porter became famous because of that article, and there were subsequent articles to that that were published in Scientific American on different tips and different ways to make telescopes. Here's Ingalls in 28. He kept coming up every year. He became a permanent regular up there. So that led to, I don't know, again, if anyone there is a telescope maker, but back in the early part of the 20th century, amateur telescope making part 1, 2, and 3, and then methods of silvering, which is they didn't have aluminum chambers back then. They silvered the mirrors and had to redo that every 6 months, how to do it. And then other books. And John Pierce was one of the early members who made mirror kits that were sent away all over the world. And it was a group effort to maintain the building and keep it upkeep. Russell was fond of keeping, and he set up this at Stellafane, which is still there. So this is the transit scope that was on the cover of Scientific American. The opening's still there, but we don't use that anymore. We have a separate building that has a solar telescope now. Here's Russel Porter, an image of him looking inside the building, could either project it onto a wall or he could look at it directly at the sun. Began going to different places, including the Bond Group in Cambridge. This is the late 1920s. And Amateur Telescope Makers of Boston was part of this. He went to the Allegheny Group and a number of others across the country and popularized making telescopes and poured fuel onto the fire of building and telescopes and astronomy clubs across the country. 1926, first members, and this is a time when they decided so many people coming up, might as well just invite them. So they have, this is the official first. Before then, it was just a meeting of the Springfield Telescope Makers. And that year, Russel Porter coined the term Stellafane, which was eventually shortened to Stellafane. And that's the way it's been known ever since. And again, it's been continuous except for World War II and the COVID years. 1926 convention, number of people there. 26 again. And 27 convention, they'd always have a dinner. That's still kind of a tradition up there. Someone here is looking through a telescope. 27, crowds keep getting bigger and bigger. This is 1929. And they decided, if you remember James Harkness telescope that was inside a building, Vermont winters are pretty severe. And they decided they'd build a scope like that, except they were going to use, if you recall, that Russel Porter had those 16-inch blanks. Well, he donated that equipment to the Springfield Telescope Makers, and they decided to build a turret telescope here, similar to what you saw for James Harkness's house. Okay, so here is, he has a rather fanciful view of what they're going to build. He sketched this out as to notice the type of architecture. It will be important later on, but this is his view of what the turret telescope would be. This is how it came out. I'm not quite as fanciful, but it's still useful. But this is still used today. Right here, the glass has been taken out, but it can be put back in anytime. You have the parabolic mirror here with a hole in it, a flat here. Light would go back down into the building, and you observe on the inside. So James and Lamson, they're used to making big machinery. This is parts, and you'll recognize this as parts that are going to be used in this building. Here are the trucks trucking up to the top of Breezy Hill, the parts that are going to become this telescope. And they poured the cement, and they have a heavy, very heavy steel ring that they have to now drag up there. They managed to do it with a lot of slave labor. As you can see them hauling this up. That'll be the ring that the dome swings around on. And from the tower that's there, they were able to take a couple of images. Here are the parabolic mirror and the flat. It's back then it was silvered. It's now luminized. And here's inside that building. It used to be hand cranked. Now there's an electric motor that what you do is you put in the RA and deck, and it'll go to that, and you bring it to that position, and then you observe what you want to. from the comfort of inside a building. Here it is with the mirror attached. 1930 convention, after that was constructed. Again, the crowds are getting bigger and bigger. Not everyone who's there is in this picture. 1930s, again, Porter and Ingalls became regulars. Even though Porter was at this point recruited to work on the Hale telescope, he came back every year. But Stellafane inspired people all over the world to start building telescopes. This is Ralph Patton from the Rhode Island Club, who, inspired by Springfield telescope makers, built this in Rhode Island and brought it to Stellafane as an entry for a prize. That would be an impressive instrument even today, I would think. And there are others who went smaller but portable. And here's a gentleman, I don't know his name, but he mounted a telescope to a Model T and he'd observe wherever he brought his car. A little inventive. Russel Porter also made, through the foundry at James and Lamson, these what's called garden telescopes, and he would sell these, made a fair amount of money on them. It's patent under his name. And they would be used either as a decorative piece in someone's backyard, but as a usable telescope if you put the mirror in it in an eyepiece. He's using the same thing here, but with solar projection to take an image of the sun, well, an image to view the sun without a filter by just projecting it from the mirror. And a number of things we take for granted today, he started. So he thought we could look at Venus in daylight, and here he is looking at Venus during daylight, which is actually a great time because the air can be steady mid-afternoon. Just don't look at the sun directly. And back then, started taking images. So back then, there was no film. You had to use plates, and you had to cover the plates just like Mount Wilson did, Mount Palomar originally. So here's someone looking through and hand guiding. They didn't have clock mounts back then. Hand guiding by keeping a target star centered on and then having a plate here being exposed for a rather long period of time because they were rather slow film back then. So that all started up at Stellafane as well. Here's Russel Porter having a discussion with a number of visitors. So in 1929, Edward Hale, who built Mount Wilson and Mount Palomar, wanted a bigger telescope than the 100-inch hooker that you had mentioned at the beginning, just before this talk. He wanted a 200-inch telescope, which in 1920s was considered bizarre and an impossible task. So what he did is he convinced Caltech to undertake this. He raised the money through a number of philanthropies across the country. And he needed good people to get this to become a reality. Who better than Russel Porter, who started amateur astronomy and taught people how to make mirrors? So he recruited Russel Porter to come to California and help design what would become the world's biggest telescope. So Porter took that as an opportunity to visit a number of places. They didn't have an interstate back then, so it was all country roads. And he went to Pikes Peak and a number of other petrified forests in Arizona. Eventually bought this home in California. That was his house back then. In order to study what he would build, he went to Mount Wilson and studied the architecture there and how it was put together. But he also took other trips and, of course, would do a drawing about it. Here he said, "Hurry up, Oscar, it's awful hot." And they took a trip to Death Valley, apparently. So here he is at Mount Wilson, photographs he took. Now, Mount Wilson was built, at the turn of the century, in 1900s, and it was built like an erector set. I mean, they built them like battleships back then. It's still, you can see it that, and the dome was huge. So he wanted to see how the dome was made, and he wanted to see how this was constructed. 60-inch at Mount Wilson. So again, Porter would take images or paintings of everything he did. Here is a image of Hale, which is still at Palomar Mountain, that was done by Porter, and with the 200-inch behind him. So the first thing he had to do, again, he was skilled in many aspects. He was a true Renaissance man. He led the survey, the site survey for the new 200-inch. He tried different sites. Here is a telescope he brought to check the seeing on different mountaintops in Southern California. Eventually, they did pick Mount Palomar, and the site was chosen. Land was starting to be cleared, and this is the future of the 200-inch telescope. Here's his sketches as to what was going to be on the grounds, the mountain, what the along with the topography. Again, he's a skilled geologist, surveyor, and architect, and here he is designing the 200-inch. So not every design is perfect. This was his first concept of the 200-inch. This one was not accepted. It was felt to be just a little bit too clunky and wanted something more streamlined. After quite a bit more work, he designed this and built a model, and this is the winning entry, and this is his design for the 200-inch telescope, which should be, for all you people in California, instantly obvious that this is the way it looks like this to this day. Here's Russel Porter later in life in the 30s. And what made the 200-inch famous, in addition to being the largest telescope, is Porter made detailed drawings of everything he did. So here's a painting of what Porter thought the dome should be like, and a neoclassical style. That was his style. If you see his drawings, you'll know exactly what I mean by that. And all his drawings had a technological aspect to them. Cutaway drawings, so you could see how it would be put together. Cutaway drawing of the telescope, cutaway drawing of the cage with a little person inside there sitting for scale. Okay. 200-inch telescope looking east. These are all hand sketches by Russel Porter. Here's a person here for scale. Mirror supports, very important. Deck axle and right ascension. It was all by oil bearings. Here's the deck axle. And you could walk up inside the deck. Here's looking north. Here's another detailed drawing. And here again is another drawing looking north. And here is a sketch by Porter of the site later in years after it was built, with the additional buildings on the side. So what the first thing it did besides that little scale model is at Caltech, they built a 1/10 scale model. Okay, so it's a 20-inch telescope, and to make sure that design concept were correct. The inner cage would be a person like Edwin Hubble, who eventually used it extensively after he left Mount Wilson. And you had to, there was no auto guiding back then. The observer sat in the cage all night long, looked at a star and kept it centered by hand while the plates were being exposed. The requirements for a successful astronomer in the 1920s through 1940s were to be able to stay up all night and not having to go to the bathroom at all. That was important. Russel Porter took paintings and drawings everywhere he went. If someone took a picture of him doing a drawing. So here is the 200-inch as it arrives at Caltech. They actually built this building just to grind the mirror and polish it. Here is the 200-inch which was cast in Corning Works in Upper New York, and then shipped across country and brought to this building where quite a crowd was there to greet its entry, knowing that this would be a historic instrument. So here is the glass as it was cast, and they're lowering it down. Here is the grinding machine, which was built specifically to grind this 200-inch mirror. Remember, no other mirror was the largest up to this point is a 100-inch mirror. Again, sense of humor. Here is his view of a lazy man's way to grind a mirror, which is being ground right here with a stick that's going back and forth, run by amplifying tubes through an electric motor, which was initiated by a heartbeat. And the grit was put on by snoring. Okay, again, he had quite a sense of humor, and this is one of his drawings up at Stellafane. This is a coelostat that he designed while he was there as well, still in use, I understand. That's for the sun. And Griffith Observatory. Now, again, neoclassical style. Why do you think that is? It's because Russel Porter had a hand in designing it. You can, just about any building that he worked on, you can see the hand of Russel Porter. If you remember back that original drawing he made of what the 16-inch Porter turret would be up at Stellafane on Breezy Hill, his imagined drawing of what it should be. Well, here it is. He actually did build it, but it's in California and now known as the Griffith Observatory. This is out of place. I'm sorry, I was supposed to move it down. This is the building of Caltech when they were building this just to house the 200-inch mirror. Oscar Marshall is one of the founders of Stellafane, who Porter enticed to come out west to because he was an expert machinist to make parts for the 200-inch. Here's one of his early telescopes from 1921. And while he was at Caltech, Russel Porter, being Russel Porter, decided to teach everyone around him how to make mirrors. So here he is over here with a number of grad students around him, and one of his coworkers here, I think maybe Oscar Marshall, also teaching a group of people how to grind a mirror and make your own telescope. Portrait Caltech had of Russell. And again, even though he was in California, he never forgot Stellafane. Every single year he would come out and attend a convention throughout the 30s and until his death in 1947. Here he is back at Stellafane in the 1930s. I'm not sure which year that is. Back in California, they're busy making parts for what eventually would be the 200-inch telescope. And we have lots of correspondence from him. Here he is waving to friends up in Vermont. A letter from Porter in 1932, staying in touch. He did not only came back for the Stellafane convention of 32, he went to Conway in New Hampshire to see a solar eclipse, and here he is setting up equipment. We're going to photograph the eclipse. Members of his little expedition to see this eclipse. Notice the period cars back there. And here's the eclipse group from New Hampshire and Vermont. Here they are after the eclipse, having a good time because it was a successful expedition. back at Stellafane. Notice the parking lot and the type of cars that were being used back then. And again, everyone was well dressed. It's not like convention these days where people show up in t-shirts. Probably should bring back this tradition of having to wear a three-piece suit, but it probably would cut down on attendance. But here everyone is, again, well-dressed in 1934 convention. Russel Porter is here. Where is he? He's in there somewhere. I've lost track of him. I think that's in, anyways, 1936 with the Porter turret there. 36 convention. Allentown group with Russel Porter. 1946. Well, the war came, and from 1940 to 45, there were no conventions. This is the first convention after the war. It started off with a bang again. Porter is now rather elderly, but he still came, and he's there in the crowd. 1947, just before his death, the 200-inch was finally completed and dedicated, and Porter was given the honor to be one of the first people to be in the cage. And here he is with the catwalk. He was able to get into the 200-inch cage to see his handiwork in life. He died shortly after that. With the loss of Russel Porter, Stellafane, to be quite frank, had some hard times in the early 1950s. Now, astronomy clubs were now common across the country with the inspiration of Stellafane. I don't know when the AU was started, but I'm sure it has a history. But it all began with Stellafane. So in the early 50s, a couple of years where it was quite thin and no one was taking a lead. 1954, amateur telescope makers of Boston joined up with the Springfield telescope makers. And because, I mean, one of the reasons is the center of industry kind of moved away from Springfield. You no longer needed water power. So plants were now not situated in places like Vermont. They were situated in Pennsylvania. We had steel and coal and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of the talent left Vermont. And that led to a kind of a brain drain from Springfield. So the amateur telescope makers of Boston teamed up with them, and we resuscitated in 54. And amateur telescope makers basically told Vermont we would guarantee the club attendance. 600 people showed up that year. Never looked back ever since then, except for 2 years during COVID. There's been a successful Stellafane convention every August, except 20 and 21 just recently because of COVID. There was not held those years, but 22 and this year 23, which was the 100th year, we had a very successful year. We get about 800 to 1,000 people every single year. Not quite where we were pre-COVID, when we were averaging about 1,200, but I suspect that's because people are just gun shy with illnesses. But we're back. We're very successful. Here is an image of the Dennis DeChico took this picture of setting up for the evening talk on a Saturday night. And here's another image I'll attribute to Dennis DeChico, a friend of mine. You may know him from editor of Sky and Tel, at night of the pink and the Porter with a Perseid meteor coming down, and the stars of the summer Milky Way over the pink. It's a nice photo. So that's kind of the history of Stellafane. The reason Porter is important is because we take it for granted now that anyone can make or buy a telescope. It wasn't like that prior to Stellafane. Back then, I'll reiterate, you either were independently, fabulously wealthy, like Lowell's, in order to buy your own telescope, or you didn't have one. So it was because of his vision and his genius at being able to make his own telescopes and popularize it across the country, that we have astronomy clubs literally across the country and have morphed into Winter Star Party. I'm a keynote speaker for that this year down here. Texas Star Party, numerous star parties across the country, and astronomy clubs. It all owes to Russel Porter and his vision way back in 1923, which is why we're proud of him and why we're looking forward to the next 100 years. So this is as good a place as any to stop. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Can you hear me, Doctor? We're going to take some Q&A if you don't mind. I'd just like to say it was an awesome presentation.
Thank you.
We're still going to need to hear his answers. So
it's just gonna be difficult with both of you up here then.
well, I'll stand back. I did want to say quickly to you, if you can hear me, that our club has had different names, but it started in '55 with a group, I think, based at City College, and they later merged. The other group, the group in '66 was City College?
No, 85.
85. There was a merger at one time, but if you think about it, we're coming upon our 70th next year, 20.
Congratulations.
So thank you. And if you're ever out in this end of the country, Dr. Motta, please come look us up.
Well, my wife has a cousin in not far from Santa Barbara. In fact, she had a dental practice in Santa Barbara.
Really? Well,
Yep.
have you ever been here, sir?
I visited Santa Barbara, yes.
Okay. Well, you're invited. We're going to send you an honorarium check, and along with our incredible porcelain cup that we sell for $10, that'll come in the mail.
I'll use it with pride. Thank you.
And that'll make you an honorary member. Where are you at the moment? What town in Massachusetts?
Well, I live in Gloucester, Mass. Right this moment, I'm in Naples, Florida. I retired last year, and I am now an official snowbird.
Okay, so you're down south catching some warmth.
Yep.
And you still attend meetings? Do they have meetings at Stellafane every month, like here?
Well, while I'm in Florida, I attend them by Zoom, and I do attend Stellafane meetings. I monthly, every other month. I attend ATMOB religiously in Boston, and I'm a member of the Fort Myers group down here as well.
Okay. And I imagine during last year's centennial, you were visited by just everybody, judges and governors, and maybe Neil deGrasse Tyson or some world-class astronomers came by to see you.
We had quite an eclectic group, and I was dressed as Russel Porter the entire meeting. It was my first meeting in a three-piece suit.
Is that right? Well, I got to tell you, we're the home of the Queen of the Missions, which has something in common with one of your early buildings. There's pink on the front of the mission. Did you know that? I don't know how they got pink back then, but what we're going to do, if you have a question, raise your hand and then shout it out. And if he can't hear it, just go ahead and shout it. We're all right. We're adults. And then if we can't hear it, I'll repeat it to him. So did anybody have a question other than myself? I got tons of them. Yes, ma'am. Yell it out.
Were you aware of Russel Porter when you built your telescope at age 12?
Were you aware of Russel Porter back at age 12 when you built your first telescope, sir?
I didn't know him when I got the thought to grind. I just knew that people could grind a mirror. Once I started grinding and looked around for people who I could ask advice from the amateur telescope makers of Boston, a gentleman by the name of Paul Vallely took me under his wing, and he handed me some books about grinding, and I quickly learned about him and have been admiring his life ever since.
Any other questions? Just yell it out or raise your hand and I'll forward it to him.
Ron, you can tell them that we have a telescope workshop every Tuesday night.
You know, I was just going to say that Tim Crawford and Tom Whittemore really should have seen this program. They run our Tuesday evening, 7:30. Can anybody log in if they are sent the Zoom link to our web?
Tim was or is logged in. Nobody can view him.
We can't see the rest of the guys. Is
Well, I
our-
see Tim Crawford on the
He's-
Zoom.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, he's there. Okay, well.
Oh, yeah,
glad
I'm
to
here.
see him. Oh, there he is.
Can you hear me?
I hear you and see your ugly bug right now, just like.
Can you ask Dr.
You want me to
Motta?
stop sharing? That way everyone who's zoomed in can be seen?
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
Up to
Either
now, we've
way.
only seen you, Doctor.
Yeah.
Oh, here we are.
Okay,
Screen
go ahead.
with us? Okay.
so
Who is
I
that?
have a question. Was Russel Porter independently wealthy? How did he get all this stuff done? I mean, I know you said he had a.
Independently wealthy, which is why he learned how to make telescope mirrors.
Okay.
I told you his father ran out of money and he had to drop out of school and then went to Boston to work, raised money and managed to get into MIT based on his working wages. A little bit
Huh.
different than how we do it these days.
Yeah.
And he signed up for Arctic expeditions. They paid him. He was a surveyor. They paid him. He came up with various inventions like the garden telescope, and those were sold across the country, bought mostly by dilettantes, but it made him some money. He designed buildings like that church and other abodes, and he made money that way. And then finally got hired by James and Lamson. That was a steady salary until Caltech and Edwin Hale lured him away to California, where he lived out the rest of his life. He was
Yeah.
unemployed. He was not independently wealthy.
Oh, wow.
Okay,
That's
we got a
amazing.
question.
Got all that done.
Got a question from the audience. Shout it out or I'll repeat it.
It's more of a comment. One of those Porter garden scopes ended up in Santa Barbara. And I believe it was Jerry Wilson who found the parts.
Our president?
No, it was Chrissy.
Okay.
All right, excuse me.
What, one of the Porter scopes that were made by Russel Porter?
Yeah, Porter Garden Telescope.
Porter Garden Telescopes.
Mhm.
Is that the name of the company?
No, that was what he called them. He called them garden telescopes, and
What?
they're collector's items these days. If you see one at a yard sale, grab it and run away.
No kidding.
Who has it here?
We restored it, and the last I heard it was in Luke's office.
Okay, and who are you?
Nobody.
Oh, you're Joe. Okay. So I hardly met you at all. We're not drinking buddies yet, Joe.
Does he have one?
We've got one here somewhere. You said,
Museum.
oh, it's in the museum.
It's in the CEO's office.
Oh, another
Well, no,
reason.
the serial number is here at Fort Myers. They have serial number 10, one of the first ones made.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So
I saw it the other night.
when did the mirror phenomenon, that started with him? It was all just lenses before that, wasn't it? No mirrors, right?
Correct. Well, there were mirrors. The Lick got a mirror from England as a reflector scope, and there were a couple of others, but they were still not made by amateurs. They were Newtonian telescopes, basically.
Okay.
Newton made the first mirror, a tiny one, and there were other mirrors being made early on by speculum metal, eventually glass. But I mean, still, most people who did those bought them, and they cost a lot of money. So his genius was he democratized amateur astronomy, taught people how to make them, and that's what led to a marked rise in amateur astronomy. And some might say the birth of the professional astronomy in the U.S.
Well, it certainly started the amateur. We're
Certainly.
thankful to you. Any other questions, or you gentlemen on the screen want to kick in? Andre Yu is with us. Patricia Zenpath, is that what it says? And Bob Brown.
Ron from Pat in the back.
Okay,
What is the image?
what is the image?
The doctor, and did he take it?
Did you take the photo behind you, sir?
I did. That's through my 32-inch telescope. I took that just a couple of months ago.
Out
It's
of the
the
same
Helix
colors.
Nebula.
That's
That's a 3-hour image an outreach of H alpha, sulfur, and hydrogen. Oxygen.
Okay, so your practice as a medical doctor was in Salem,
Yes.
and you would drive up to Vermont, even though probably they're in Massachusetts, they must have astronomy clubs everywhere, I would imagine.
Oh, yeah. We have the Amateur Telescope Makers of Boston. We meet at Harvard, and that's the second oldest club in the country.
Is that right?
Yep.
Second oldest, behind.
Stellafane being the first.
Stellafane was the first in 1923. Well, there was some stuff going on in 20, but they were just planning it then, weren't they?
Yeah.
You had the governor in there, the one that became the governor.
I have another question for you.
Okay, Tom?
On the Russel Porter garden scope, from what I could tell, either by pictures or what the one that we had, it looked like it could be used for a garden party and actually as a sundial during the day.
That's correct.
Sundial.
Yep. That's what I was
Yeah, it was
wondering.
a multi-purpose instrument. Again, it was not for real astronomers, it was for dilettantes. But he sold quite a few of them and made a pretty penny with them. They were cast at James and Lamson.
Must
But
have been-
nowadays, they're real collector's items. So if you got one, treasure it. And if you don't want it, you can sell it for a fortune.
We do go through a lot of telescopes here. They come and go. Tom is in charge of a lot of that. I imagine seeing daytime eclipses would be dangerous back then. Did they take it easy and?
Well, they didn't use a
blind?
garden scope, but I mean, you saw the equipment that he used for the 1932 eclipse. He had a camera and he had, filters like we do today.
Okay, the picture at the end in color showing the group on the hill. I didn't see any buildings, but I assume there's buildings left or maybe several.
Oh, yeah.
pictures
We
back.
have a pavilion where we have meetings, but for the Saturday night final meeting, it's out in the open unless it's raining, and it's a huge bowl, so to speak. Where the picture was taken from is close to where the speaker would be.
And the state of Vermont declared something, I imagine, for that year for Stellafane and Springfield.
Yeah, we've had quite a celebration, and again, the whole site is now a historical landmark.
Wow. Any plans to come out here and see us? Or
I may
vacation?
sometime, sure.
Is there a Mrs. Motta?
Yes, she's in bed already. After being married for close to 48 years, she doesn't want to hear me talk anymore.
So you're just down there through the winter months and then you're going to return in the summer.
I'm going to the eclipse in Texas in April and head home after that.
Gotcha. All right. Do you stay up and watch meteor showers? We get a lot of them.
I'm not so fond of little pebbles. My interest in deep sky galaxies.
Well, okay, you were a hit. We got a question from Mr. Bruce Murdoch over here, who is the president of the local theater organ society. If you love that big, huge keyboard thing down at the Arlington Theater, check with Bruce. And he's a guy on these. He's got an incredible telescope. Shout it out.
I don't really have a question. I have a statement, and that's Jurgen. Trying his last name. He has one of those telescopes that he built. He's brought it to the.
Why don't you come up here and ask him if you want to talk to him?
I'm just making a statement.
Okay, but he can't hear you. Can you hear Bruce?
Very faintly. Maybe you can just repeat his question.
No, come on up, Bruce. He's part of our Monday morning vlog every 11 a.m. We do the Santa Barbara Astronomical Unit Astro Hour.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we have a member of our club, Jurgen Kilmer. That's what I thought, Kilmer, who has a minimalist telescope that he built. Very much like the one that was shown. It, I don't know if he did the castings or exactly how it's put together. But he brings it to like when we have the big star party out here in the veranda once a year.
Right.
Sounds
So
good. He should bring it up to Stellafane and enter it for a prize.
Well,
No commercial exhibits, but we gladly welcome any homemade telescopes.
Don't you have a problem with those scopes and stray light and bad contrast?
What do you mean?
Well, because you don't have the tube that shields the
Oh,
primary.
well, I'm not talking about the garden telescopes. I mean, those were, you have to be very in a dark sky site, obviously. And back then, every place was a dark sky site. But you know, people these days make darn good instruments that I feel are better than what you can buy commercially. You know, if you think about it, if you run a company and you get it a mirror to quarter wave, generally it's good enough. You're going to send it out because you got to make a profit. You're not going to waste another month or two trying to get it perfect. An amateur, a real amateur astronomer. In fact, I'm grinding a 12-inch right now, which I'm going to design to be fit inside a collapsible and fit over in overhead of a plane. I'm nearly done with the mirror. But a real amateur, and I got it about third wave right now, but I'm not going to stop at quarter wave. I'm going to go to 10th wave. A real amateur is going to spend an extra month or two to make it perfect, 10th wave or better, because why not? That's the attitude of most people who submit telescopes to Stellafane for judging. You're going to spend a little extra time and make it perfect. You're not bound by a time constraint because you have to make a profit for a company. That's why most good amateur telescope, and certainly all the ones that win at Stellafane, handily beat anything you can buy on the commercial market.
Yep. Yep.
My 32-inch telescope is 16th wavefront.
Fantastic.
And how much have you gentlemen spent on your instruments?
Well, I bought mine.
That's what I'm saying. How much did you spend?
My C8 was $293 used,
Good deal.
and my C11 was given to me.
Really?
Seemed a better deal.
Those are the ones you take up on West Camino Cielo?
Oh, yeah. I have a 5-inch. It's not a Schmidt-Cassegrain, it's a Matzetoff.
Okay.
I bought that one. That one was, I don't know, pushing $1,000 by the time we get all the stuff for it.
Wow.
But a lot of my astrophotos have been through that scope. Because the bigger scope you get, the more sensitive you are to atmospheric distortion.
Oh,
And so, you know, if you have good tracking like I do, and so I had five-minute exposures.
right.
But you know, through a 5-inch scope, it does much better job than a shorter exposure through the 11-inch.
Well, we got to send them up in a rocket and take them out 1,000,000 miles to a Lagrange point.
Dr. Motta, I have an 8-inch that I bought when I was 20 years old, and 50 years later I finished it. I suffered from turned an edge about 50 times, and finally got the thing made. And now that I'm getting older, my telescopes that I'm making are getting smaller and smaller.
I'm 71. I understand.
Thank you, my friend. How's things going over at the Arlington? Do a quick plug.
Well, second Saturday of the month, we generally have an open console.
Tell them. Come. What time of day on the second?
9 until 11 a.m. You should go to our website, the Santa Barbara Astronomical Unit. I'm sorry, the Santa Barbara Theater Organ Society, SBTOS.
Right.
Our website is sbtos.org, and you can go there and you see our calendar. We would love to have it rigorously on the second Saturday, but the theater, if they get something that's going to pay them, we get pushed to a Saturday before or Saturday after.
Yeah, they've got a huge 3-keyboard
manual.
It's in the stage. It's underneath.
It lives under the stage.
On the
It's on a
stage
big
there.
lift.
Yeah.
In fact, this stage crew has learned the hard way. The lift can lift 7,000 pounds. The organ console weighs about 1,500. And there's sometimes when they remove parts of the stage, they didn't take the bolts and put them all the way back in.
All right.
When the lift came up, it just ripped out the front of the stage.
Well, we'll get some people for you too. All right. We'll see you on Monday. I guess we run out of questions. Did you have one, Mike? You want to talk any? You own 5 scopes. You own 2. And how many do you say you have, Tim? We lost him. You muted yourself, or you got muted.
Yeah, I've made 2, and then I ground a mirror on the Russel Porter scope, and I have a 16-inch waiting in the wings. But like I said, I don't know if I want to build that. It's going to have to be in one place.
Well, I hope Tom Whittemore is watching from home or was.
My
Oh, yeah.
rule is if you can lift a telescope, then it's not big enough.
All right, listen, we're gonna bring this to a close and cut the cord, and thank you again. And if you're ever out here, you're welcome to come join us, and we'd love to show you a great program next door in our Gladwin Planetarium like we had tonight. Otherwise, take care of yourself, and someday maybe we'll visit Stellafane.
All right.
Dr.
all
Mario,
welcome.
Dr. Mario Motta, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
I hit end here on the screen. We're done, right, sir?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. We'll talk to you later.
Pleasure talking to you. Take care.
All right.
It's the bright one.
The other red one?
Yep.